The Galactic Union Training Academy, or GUTA, as it was affectionately known by its cadets, hovered in geosynchronous orbit above the pristine blue-green world of Nexus Prime. Its gleaming crystalline spires and reinforced habitat rings housed the most diverse collection of sentient species this side of the Andromeda Galaxy. For 3 centuries, GUTA had churned out the elite forces that maintained peace across 17 solar systems, its graduates going on to become legendary commanders, diplomats, and heroes. And today, much to the chagrin of Commander Krill'vax, they were letting in a human. "This is preposterous," hissed the commander, his exoskeleton clicking in agitation as he paced the observation deck. "Humans are barely interstellar. They've only achieved faster than light travel in the last 15 galactic cycles." General Zorix, a towering Palusian with luminescent skin that rippled with shades of blue and purple, simply shrugged her 6 shoulders simultaneously. "The Council has spoken, Commander. The humans have petitioned for membership in the Galactic Union, and as part of the integration process, we must accept qualified candidates into our institutions." "Qualified? They're from a Class 9 death world." Krill'vax's antennae twitched violently. "Their biology is utterly incompatible with standard training protocols." "Then adapt the protocols," Zorix replied calmly, studying the approaching shuttle that carried their newest recruit. Besides, the humans scored remarkably well on the entrance exams. "Perhaps this Felix Reynolds will surprise you." "The only surprise will be if he survives orientation week," muttered Krill'vax. The shuttle docked with a gentle hiss of hydraulics, and the airlock cycled open. Felix Reynolds stepped into the academy for the first time, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder and a lopsided grin plastered across his face. At 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and dark hair cropped close to his head, he was, by human standards, fairly average. By Galactic Union standards, he was a dense, muscular anomaly from a planet with gravity that would crush most sentient life. "Cadet Reynolds reporting for duty," Felix announced, dropping his bag and snapping a crisp salute that he'd practiced for weeks after studying Galactic Union protocols. Krill'vax's compound eyes narrowed, all 4 of them. "Welcome to GUTA, human. I hope you've prepared yourself for disappointment." Felix's smile didn't waver. "I packed extra socks, so I think I'm good." The commander's mandibles clicked in what Felix assumed was the alien equivalent of grinding teeth. "Follow me. I'll introduce you to your cohort. Try not to break anything. Or anyone." As they moved through the academy's gleaming corridors, Felix felt the stares and whispers of alien cadets and instructors. He'd been warned about this by the Union recruiters. Humans had a reputation. Earth was classified as a death world, a planet with environmental conditions so harsh that most galactic species considered it uninhabitable. High gravity, extreme temperature variations, toxic atmospheric components like oxygen, and terrifying biodiversity full of predators. To most aliens, humans were terrifying space orcs who had evolved on a hellscape. In the central hall, 7 other new cadets stood at attention. Felix took in the diverse collection of beings, a hovering cloud of gas contained in a semi-permeable force field, a crystalline entity that refracted light in hypnotic patterns, and a being that seemed to be made entirely of liquid metal, and others equally exotic. "The cadets, this is Felix Reynolds. The human," Krill'vax said the word human as if it tasted bad. "He will be joining Delta Squad for this training cycle. I expect you all to accommodate his special needs." A tall, slender alien with iridescent scales and 4 arms stepped forward. "Commander, with all respect, is it wise to place a gravity-dependent species in Delta Squad? Our training regimen is adaptable." Instructor Trell. Krill'vax interrupted. "The human will simply have to keep up or wash out." From among the cadets, a sleek feline-like being with midnight blue fur and luminous eyes regarded Felix with obvious skepticism. "Commander, permission to speak?" "Granted, Cadet Vela. Humans come from a high-gravity environment. Won't that give Reynolds an unfair advantage in physical training?" Felix couldn't help but chuckle. If only they knew. Earth's gravity was actually considered moderate by Death World standards. "An advantage?" Krill'vax laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "The Cadet Vela, Humans may have dense musculature, but they lack the evolutionary adaptations that make true warriors. No offense, Reynolds. None taken. Felix replied with a shrug. I'm just here to learn. Then your first lesson begins now, Krill'vax announced. Report to Habitat Ring C, Section 12. Your quarters have been specially prepared. As Felix walked away, he heard the commander murmur to Instructor Trell. Let's see how the human enjoys our standard gravity settings. I give him 3 days before he's begging for a gravity reducer. What they didn't know was that Felix had excellent hearing, another adaptation from his Death World heritage. He smiled to himself. This was going to be interesting. Felix's first week at the academy was, to put it mildly, a cosmic nightmare. The standard gravity settings in the training facilities were calibrated for species evolved on worlds with approximately 0.7 Earth gravity. For most cadets, this created ideal conditions. For Felix, it felt like he was bouncing around on the moon with weights strapped to his ankles. Control your movements, Reynolds, barked Instructor Trell as Felix accidentally launched himself 6 feet into the air, trying to perform a simple combat role. This isn't a recreational bounce facility. Felix crashed back down, his timing off in the lower gravity. Sorry, sir. Still adjusting. Across the training arena, Drox, a hulking reptilian cadet with armored scales and an attitude problem, snickered loudly. Perhaps the human requires a gravity simulator to help him stay grounded. Or perhaps lead boots. The other cadets laughed, except for Vela, who watched Felix with those luminous, calculating eyes. That's enough, Drox, Trell said, though Felix noted the instructor seemed amused. Reynolds, take a break and observe how proper cadets navigate in standard conditions. Felix retreated to the sidelines, frustrated but determined. The lower gravity made precise movements nearly impossible. He'd either put too much strength into actions or too little. Combat simulations were a disaster, and the obstacle courses that other cadets glided through became a humiliating showcase of his flailing limbs. By the end of the 3rd day, every muscle in Felix's body ached from the constant adjustments. He collapsed onto his bunk in the quarters that had indeed been specially prepared with gravity set to match Nexus Prime's standard 0.7G field. Having trouble, human? Felix looked up to find Vela standing in his doorway, her silhouette backlit by the corridor lights. Nothing I can't handle, he said, sitting up despite his fatigue, though I admit I didn't expect low gravity to be so challenging. Vela tilted her head, the gesture oddly reminiscent of Earthcats. You're strong, but strength means nothing without control. Your species evolved with different parameters. Yeah, I'm getting that message loud and clear. Felix rolled his shoulders. The instructors seem to enjoy watching me struggle. Commander Krill'vax has never been fond of adding new species to the Union, Vela said, stepping into the room. Especially ones he considers primitive. And what do you think? Felix asked. Vela's whiskers twitched. I think you're either going to wash out spectacularly or surprise everyone. I haven't decided which I'd prefer to see. Felix grinned. Well, I prefer surprises. The next morning, Felix approached Commander Krill'vax after the daily briefing. The other cadets had already filed out, heading to their respective training assignments. Commander, request permission to speak freely, Felix said, standing at attention. Krill'vax's antennae quivered slightly. Granted, Reynolds. Though I'm rather busy. Sir, I'm having difficulty adapting to the standard gravity settings. I was wondering if my training environment could be adjusted to help me acclimate more effectively. The commander's mandibles clicked together in what Felix now recognized as amusement. Struggling already, Reynolds. Perhaps humans aren't as adaptable as your species claims. Actually, sir, Felix continued, keeping his tone respectful, I was hoping you might increase the gravity in my training chambers. Krill'vax went perfectly still. Increase? Yes, sir. The current settings make it difficult to control my movements with precision. A higher gravity field would help me adjust more quickly to the different conditions. From behind him, Felix heard a soft sound. He turned to see Vela standing in the doorway, clearly having overheard his request. Her expression was unreadable, but something like respect flickered in her luminous eyes. "Cadet Vela," Krill'vax snapped. "Don't you have somewhere to be?" "Yes, Commander," she replied smoothly. "But if I may, I think Reynolds has a point. Humans are accustomed to higher gravity. Perhaps training in conditions closer to their native environment would help them master the necessary control before transitioning to standard settings." Krill'vax's compound eyes darted between the two cadets. Felix could almost see the gears turning in the commander's mind. "Very well," Krill'vax finally said. Mandibles spread in what Felix now recognized as the alien equivalent of a smirk. "I'll have the gravity in your personal training room adjusted, Reynolds. Let's see how you perform with double the standard gravity. That should be educational." Felix suppressed a smile. "Thank you, Commander. I appreciate your accommodation." As they walked away, Vela fell into step beside him. "You realize he's trying to break you, don't you?" she murmured. "I'm counting on it," Felix replied. Later that day, Felix overheard Krill'vax speaking with Instructor Trell in the monitoring room adjacent to his training chamber. "Double gravity," Trell was saying. "Commander, that's 1.4 times Earth standard. The human will be flattened." "Precisely," Krill'vax replied, not bothering to lower his voice. "Reynolds needs to learn his limitations. When he fails, and he will fail, perhaps the Union will reconsider this foolish integration initiative." Felix pretended not to hear as he entered the training chamber. The door sealed behind him with a pneumatic hiss, and he felt the gravity field engage, the familiar pull of increased weight settling into his bones. It felt like coming home. Felix stepped into the center of the training chamber, feeling the satisfying weight of near-Earth gravity pulling at his limbs. He rolled his shoulders and bounced lightly on the balls of his feet, a smile spreading across his face that he didn't bother to hide from the observation window. The beginning basic combat sequence announced the automated training system, standard difficulty level. The first holographic opponent materialized a generic bipedal faun with moderate offensive capabilities. Felix settled into a fighting stance, feeling more grounded than he had in days. When the hologram charged, he moved with precision and control, his movements fluid and economical in their heavier gravity. In the observation room, Krill'vax's antennae twitched in confusion as Felix dispatched the first opponent in record time, without a single misstep. Increased difficulty. The commander ordered, his mandibles clicking rapidly. Level 2. 2 more holograms appeared, and Felix handled them with equal ease. His movements were no longer the awkward, gangly flailing of previous days. Now he moved like water flowing, precise and powerful. "This is unexpected," Instructor Trell observed, all 4 of his arms crossed over his chest. "It's a fluke," Krill'vax insisted. "Increase to level 3. By the time they reached level 5, a difficulty rating that even senior cadets approached with caution, a small crowd had gathered in the observation room. Vela stood at the front, her luminous eyes wide as Felix dispatched increasingly complex combat scenarios with almost casual competence. "I don't understand," muttered Drox, his scales flushing a dark orange in agitation. "He was completely inept yesterday." "He wasn't inept," Vela replied quietly. "He was buoyant. Now he's properly weighted." After an hour of increasingly difficult combat simulations, Felix hadn't even broken a sweat. He stood in the center of the training floor, waiting for the next challenge, a look of calm focus on his face. "End simulation," Krill'vax finally ordered, his voice tight. "Reynolds, report to the observation room immediately." When Felix entered, he found himself facing not just Krill'vax and Trell, but also Admiral Zorix and a cluster of fascinated cadets. "Explain yourself," Krill'vax demanded. Felix adopted his most innocent expression. "Sir, is your performance. Yesterday you could barely complete a basic role without injuring yourself. Today you're handling advanced combat simulations as if you've been training for years." Felix shrugged. "As I said, Commander, I do better in higher gravity. Earth's gravity is approximately 9.8 meters per second squared. The standard gravity here is around 6.9. I've been essentially trying to fight while floating. Today's settings feel much more natural. Admiral Zorix's skin rippled with interested blues and purples. Fascinating. The gravity in that chamber is set to twice our standard, approximately 13.8 meters per second squared. That's significantly higher than your home world, yet you appear completely comfortable. Actually, Felix said, feeling a little bold after his successful training session, it still feels a bit light. I've been doing my personal workouts at 1.5 Earth gravity since I was a teenager. It helps build density for sports. The room went completely silent. Even Drox seemed too shocked to make a snide comment. You train at higher than your native gravity? Trell finally asked, clearly struggling with the concept. Voluntarily? Eh? Sure, Felix said. Lots of human athletes do. We have specialized training facilities that can simulate up to 3G, though most of us stick to 1.5 or 2G for safety reasons. Krill'vax's exoskeleton made a sound like cracking ice as he shifted uncomfortably. Reynolds, are you suggesting that the gravity setting we believed would incapacitate you is actually insufficient for your optimal training? Felix met the commander's compound gaze steadily. With all due respect, sir, if you really want to challenge me, you might consider tripling the standard gravity. That would give me a proper workout. The words hung in the air for a long moment. Then Admiral Zorix burst into a melodious laugh that sounded like wind chimes in a storm. Oh, I like this human, she declared, her skin flashing bright purple with amusement. Krill'vax, I believe your attempt to teach Cadet Reynolds a lesson has backfired rather spectacularly. The commander's antennae flattened against his head. Admiral, with respect, this is highly irregular. Our training protocols are designed to challenge each cadet appropriately, Zorix finished for him. If Reynolds requires triple gravity to be properly challenged, then triple gravity he shall have. But Admiral, Trell interjected, our systems aren't designed to. I'm sure you'll figure something out. Instructor, Zorix said, her tone making it clear the matter was settled. After all, adaptability is a core virtue of the Galactic Union. Later that evening, as Felix was returning to his quarters, he found Vela waiting for him in the corridor. That was quite a show today, Reynolds, she said, falling into step beside him. The commander's emergency meeting with the Academy board lasted 3 hours. Felix winced. That bad? That good, Vela corrected, a purring undertone in her voice. You've forced them to reconsider every assumption they've made about human physiology. The xenobiologists are beside themselves with excitement. And the other cadets? Vela's whiskers twitched. Drox is telling everyone you cheated somehow. Most of the others are simply confused. You're impressed. Or both. And you? Felix asked, genuinely curious about her opinion. I think, she said slowly, that you're either the luckiest fool in the galaxy or much cleverer than you appear. Felix grinned. Why can't I be both? The next morning, a notice appeared on Felix's datapad. Special training regimen approved for Cadet Reynolds. Report to Specialized Training Chamber 7 at 0600 hours. When he arrived, he found not only Krill'vax and Trell waiting for him, but a team of Union scientists and engineers making final adjustments to the chamber's gravity systems. Cadet Reynolds, Krill'vax greeted him stiffly. As requested, we've modified this chamber to provide triple standard gravity approximately 2.1 times your Earth normal. The medical team will be monitoring your vital signs continuously. If you show any signs of distress, the exercise will be terminated immediately. Understood, sir, Felix replied, fighting to keep his expression neutral. Thank you for the accommodation. Don't thank me yet, Krill'vax said, his mandibles twitching. Today's exercise will test the limits of even your unusual physiology. As Felix stepped into the chamber, he heard one of the scientists whisper, I still can't believe he asked for this. No wonder they evolved on a death world. The door sealed behind him, and Felix felt the gravity system engage. The familiar weight settled into his bones, heavier than earth, but not unbearable. Not even close to the 3G he'd trained in back home, he smiled to himself. This was going to be fun. As the weeks passed, Felix's reputation at the academy transformed from fragile human oddity to terrifying death-world monster. The cadets who had previously snickered at his struggles now gave him a wide berth in the corridors. Even Drox's taunts took on a more subdued quality, though his reptilian eyes still burned with resentment whenever Felix entered a room. "You're becoming quite the celebrity," Vela remarked one day during their shared meal period. She had, somewhat to Felix's surprise, become his most consistent ally at the academy. "There's a betting pool on whether you'll break the combat simulator's record by the end of the term." Felix nearly choked on his protein supplement. "There's a what now?" "A betting pool," she repeated, her whiskers twitching with amusement. "I'm currently standing at 3,000 credits. I've put 200 on you breaking it within the month." "Your confidence is touching," Felix said dryly, "but I'm not sure I'm living up to the hype. Commander Krill'vax has been making sure of that." It was true. After the initial gravity debacle, the commander had shifted strategies. Physical training was now just one component of a grueling regime specifically designed to target what Krill'vax perceived as human weaknesses. Sensory overload exercises that bombarded Felix with frequencies beyond human hearing range. Endurance tests in atmospheric conditions that burned his lungs. Tactical simulations that required processing visual information at speeds just beyond human capability. "The commander is determined to find your breaking point," Vela agreed, her luminous eyes studying him intently, "though I begin to wonder if humans have one." "Everyone has a breaking point," Felix said quietly. "Krill'vax just hasn't found mine yet." Their conversation was interrupted by the Academy's alert system. "All Delta Squad cadets report to Combat Simulator Delta immediately. Full combat gear required." Felix and Vela exchanged glances. Unscheduled combat drills were rare and usually signaled something important or problematic. When they arrived at the simulator, Felix immediately sensed something was off. The massive chamber had been reconfigured into a complex terrain of obstacles, pitfalls, and challenging vertical elements. Commander Krill'vax stood at the entrance, his exoskeleton gleaming under the harsh training lights. "Today we begin paired combat exercises," he announced as the cadets assembled. "You will be randomly assigned partners for these exercises," his compound eyes fixed on Felix. "With one exception, Cadet Reynolds will be paired with Cadet Drox." A murmur ran through the assembled cadets. Drox's scales flushed a deep crimson as he stepped forward, towering over Felix by nearly 2 feet. "The objective is simple," Krill'vax continued. "Navigate the course, retrieve the target object, and return to the starting point. You must work together. If either partner is incapacitated, both fail." As the other cadets received their assignments and entered the simulator in pairs, Vela passed close to Felix. "Be careful," she murmured. "Drox requested this pairing 3 days ago." Felix nodded slightly, processing this information, so it wasn't random at all. This was a setup. Reynolds. "Drox. You're up," Krill'vax called, his mandibles clicking with what Felix now recognized as anticipation. As they entered the simulator, Drox turned to Felix, his reptilian face splitting into what might have been a smile, revealing rows of serrated teeth. "Try to keep up, human. I'd hate to fail because you can't handle a little pressure." The simulation began, and immediately Felix realized something was wrong. The gravity in the chamber wasn't set to standard, or even to Earth normal. It fluctuated wildly as they moved through different zones from near weightlessness to crushing pressure that had to be at least 4G. For Drox, evolved on a low-gravity world, the heavier zones were clearly challenging but manageable with his powerful musculature. For Felix, it was like someone had turned the difficulty setting to maximum. "Enjoying the ride, Reynolds?" Drox called back as Felix struggled through a particularly dense gravity pocket. "I had a little chat with the environmental controls technician. Thought you might appreciate some variety after all that special treatment you've been getting." Felix gritted his teeth and pushed forward. So that was the game. Drox had sabotaged the course, likely with Krill'vax's tacit approval. The fluctuating gravity made movement unpredictable, and coordination between partners nearly impossible. It was designed to make him fail. Halfway through the course, they encountered a vertical climbing section through what appeared to be a magnetic disturbance field. Drox scaled it easily, his clawed feet finding perches on the sheer surface. Felix, however, found himself fighting not only the shifting gravity, but also a powerful magnetic pull that seemed specifically calibrated to the metal components in his combat gear. "What's the matter, Reynolds?" Drox called down, watching Felix struggle. "I thought humans were supposed to be adaptable." With a monumental effort, Felix managed to reach the top, his muscles screaming in protest. "Adaptable doesn't mean invincible," he gasped, "and sabotage isn't exactly sporting, Drox." The reptilian cadet's eyes narrowed. "I don't know what you're talking about. But if you can't handle the standard training environment, perhaps you should reconsider your place in this academy." They continued through the course, Felix increasingly certain that the environmental controls had been tampered with specifically to target human physiological limitations. When they finally reached the target object, a small crystalline sphere pulsing with energy, Drox snatched it up triumphantly. "I'll carry this," he announced. "Wouldn't want your fragile human hands to drop it." As they turned to navigate back through the course, Felix noticed something alarming. The sphere was emitting radiation at a frequency that human eyes could detect, but that would be invisible to Drox's visual range. The pulsing was becoming more rapid, more intense. "Drox," Felix said urgently, "give me the sphere." "Not a chance, human." Drox sneered, clutching it tighter. "It's destabilizing," Felix insisted. "Look at the emission pattern." "Another human trick?" "I'm not falling for." The sphere pulsed violently, and Drox hissed in pain as it burned through his scales. He dropped it reflexively, and Felix lunged to catch it before it shattered on the ground. The moment his hands closed around it, the burning sensation hit him too, but human skin, while less armored than Drox's scales, had different heat sensitivity thresholds. "We need to get this back to the start point," Felix said through gritted teeth, the pain intense but manageable. "Its containment field is failing." Drox stared at him in confusion. "How can you hold it?" "It's burning." "Differently," Felix replied simply. "Come on, we're going to fail if we don't move now." To his surprise, Drox followed without further argument. They navigated the treacherous return path, Felix clutching the increasingly unstable sphere while Drox, perhaps reluctantly, helped him through the worst of the gravity fluctuations. When they finally staggered across the finish line and placed the sphere in the containment field, Felix's hands were blistered and raw. Medical drones immediately descended to treat him, while Krill'vax and Trell stood nearby, watching with unreadable expressions. "That was unexpected," Trell said finally. "The sphere wasn't supposed to destabilize, and the gravity mapping wasn't in the original course design," Krill'vax added, his antennae twitching rapidly. "Someone modified the parameters." Drox, nursing his own injured hand, looked away. As the medical drones finished treating Felix's burns, Vela approached. "You passed," she said simply. "Despite everything." Felix managed a weak smile. "Turns out Drox and I make a surprisingly good team when we're both about to get vaporized by an unstable energy sphere." "The final qualification exam is in 3 days," she continued, her voice low. "Word is that Krill'vax has designed it specifically to eliminate you from the program." "Let me guess," Felix sighed. "More creative interpretations of standard training environments." Vela's whiskers twitched. "Worse. The Crucible." Felix had heard whispers about the Crucible, an infamous survival challenge that had been discontinued years ago after several cadets had nearly died. Supposedly, it tested not just physical endurance but psychological resilience under extreme stress. "That's been banned," Felix said, frowning. "Officially, yes," Vela agreed. "Unofficially, Krill'vax has received special permission to revive it for your unique physiological profile." Felix shook his head. "He really doesn't want humans in the Galactic Union, does he?" "No," Vela said solemnly. "He doesn't. But I think he's beginning to realize that getting rid of you won't be as easy as he hoped." As they left the training area, Felix noticed Drox watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not quite respect, certainly not friendship, but perhaps something like reluctant recognition. 3 days. 3 days to prepare for a challenge designed specifically to make him fail. Felix flexed his newly healed hands. Well, if Krill'vax wanted to see what humans were really capable of under pressure, he was about to get his wish. The day of the Crucible dawned with an eerie red light filtering through the Academy's massive observation windows. Nexus Prime's third moon was in transit, casting a bloody pallor over the training facilities. Felix found it appropriately dramatic for what was shaping up to be the most significant test of his life. Cadet Reynolds, Admiral Zorix greeted him as he entered the preparation chamber. I understand today is your final qualification exam. Felix snapped to attention. Yes, Admiral. The towering Pelusian's skin rippled with shades of deep blue concern, Felix had learned. Commander Krill'vax has briefed me on the parameters of your test. I want you to know that I expressed reservations about the extreme nature of the challenge. But you approved it anyway, Felix said. Then quickly added, sir. Zorix's upper shoulders lifted in what Felix now recognized as the Pelusian equivalent of a resigned sigh. The Galactic Union Council is watching your progress closely, Reynolds. Your performance here will influence decisions regarding human integration into Union institutions for generations to come. No pressure. Then, Felix muttered. Indeed. Zorix agreed, apparently missing the sarcasm. Commander Krill'vax believes humans lack the necessary qualities for true Union service. I remain undecided. Today's test will be illuminating. With that encouraging speech, the Admiral departed, leaving Felix alone with his thoughts. Not for long, though, as the door slid open again to admit Vela. I thought you'd be with the other cadets, Felix said, surprised. I should be, she agreed, her luminous eyes scanning the preparation room. But I wanted to give you something first. She handed him a small device, no larger than a coin. It's a personal atmospheric regulator, very small range, but it might help. Felix stared at the device, then at Vela. This is against regulations. So is the Crucible, she countered. Krill'vax has modified the chamber to simulate conditions from a Class 12 death world. The atmosphere will be highly caustic, even for a human. Why are you helping me? Felix asked, genuinely puzzled. What's in it for you? Vela's whiskers twitched. Perhaps I've placed another bet on you. Or perhaps I believe the Union needs to evolve beyond Krill'vax's limited vision of what makes a species worthy. She turned to leave, then paused. Also, I find your reactions to things entertaining. Before Felix could respond to this ambiguous statement, the door slid open again, revealing Commander Krill'vax flanked by Instructor Trell and 2 Academy security officers. Cadet Vela, Krill'vax said sharply, you are not authorized to be in this area. Return to observation deck C immediately. Vela bowed slightly, the gesture just barely within the bounds of respect, and slipped past the commander without another word. Reynolds. Ervan, Krill'vax continued, his mandibles clicking rapidly, your final qualification exam will commence in 10 minutes. The parameters are as follows. You will enter the Crucible chamber, which has been configured to simulate survival conditions from various Union worlds. Your objective is to navigate from the entry point to the extraction point within 4 standard hours. Medical monitors will track your vital signs throughout. If at any point your life signs indicate critical failure, the test will be terminated. And if I fail? Felix asked. Then you will be removed from the Academy program and return to Earth with a recommendation that humans require further evolutionary development before integration into Union institutions, Krill'vax replied, not bothering to hide the satisfaction in his voice. And if I succeed? The commander's antennae flattened against his head. Then you will graduate to full cadet status and continue your training accordingly. Felix nodded. I understand, sir. I doubt that very much. Reynolds, Krill'vax said quietly, but you will. 10 minutes later, Felix stood before the massive doors of the Crucible chamber. Through the observation window, He could see that the interior had been transformed into an alien hellscape, a shifting terrain of jagged rock formations, bubbling chemical pools, and atmospheric disturbances visible as heat waves rippling through the air. The gravity indicators beside the door showed the setting at 3.2 G-, over 3 times Nexus Prime standard, and significantly higher than Earth's natural gravity. Trell approached, carrying what appeared to be a standard environment suit. Regulations require that all cadets be provided with basic protective equipment, he explained, though his tone suggested he disagreed with this policy. However, this suit is calibrated for standard atmospheric conditions. Its effectiveness in the crucible environment will be limited. Felix examined the suit. It was indeed basic, no atmospheric filters for the caustic air Vela had warned about, minimal thermal protection, and structural reinforcement that would be insufficient for the gravity setting. It was designed to fail. "Thank you, instructor," Felix said politely, accepting the suit. "I'm sure it will be adequate." Trell's forearms crossed over his chest. "Reynolds, I am not fond of humans. I find your species crude, overly emotional, and remarkably dense both physically and intellectually. But I am a Union officer before I am a xenophobe. What awaits you in that chamber?" He hesitated. No cadet has successfully completed the crucible at these settings, not in the Academy's history. "There's a first time for everything," Felix replied. Trell regarded him for a long moment. "Indeed. Good luck, cadet." As the instructor walked away, Felix quickly slipped Vela's atmospheric regulator into a hidden pocket of the environment suit. Then, taking a deep breath of normal air, he stepped into the airlock and waited for the crucible to begin. The doors hissed open, and immediately Felix was hit by a wall of pressure and heat. The 3.2 G gravity pulled at every cell in his body, while the caustic atmosphere burned his exposed skin despite the suit's minimal protection. Through the pain, he focused on the map that had been uploaded to his datapad -4.7 kilometers of the most hostile terrain the Academy could simulate. "Cadet Reynolds has entered the crucible," he heard Krill'vax announce over the chamber's communication system. Timer engaged. Felix moved forward, each step requiring conscious effort against the crushing gravity. 400 meters into the course, Felix's muscles were already screaming in protest. The punishing gravity made every movement a battle of will against physics. Sweat pooled beneath his suit, unable to evaporate properly in the dense atmosphere. "Human physiology is fascinating," came Commander Krill'vax's voice over the comms. "Your species compensates for weakness with such determination. Ultimately futile, but interesting to observe." Felix ignored the taunt, conserving his breath. Instead, he activated Vela's atmospheric regulator, feeling immediate relief as a small bubble of breathable air formed around his face. The caustic burn in his lungs subsided, allowing him to think more clearly. Ahead lay a field of what appeared to be crystalline formations, their edges gleaming wickedly in the crimson light. The map indicated no way around, only through. Felix approached cautiously, noting how the crystals seemed to vibrate in response to his proximity. "Ah, the Galaxian crystal field," Krill'vax commented, "sounds sensitive. The resonance from your movements will cause them to shatter. The fragments are, shall we say, remarkably penetrative." Felix paused, studying the terrain. "Sound sensitive." He remembered something from xenobiology class. Galaxian crystals responded to specific frequency ranges. If he could move at a cadence that fell outside those frequencies. He removed his boots, wincing as his feet made contact with the heated ground through the thin soles of his suit. The extra sensation would be worth the improved control. Then, measuring his steps carefully, he began to move through the crystal field with deliberate, sliding motions that minimized vibration. From the observation deck, he heard murmurs of surprise. "Interesting approach." Instructor Trell's voice came through. "Though removing protective footwear in this environment seems ill-advised." Felix kept moving, his pace agonizingly slow but steady. The crystals hummed but didn't shatter. Halfway through the field, he stumbled slightly enough to send a sharp vibration through the nearest formation. It exploded outward, sending razor-sharp fragments flying. Several embedded themselves in his suit, 2 piercing the material and slicing into his shoulder. Felix bit back a cry of pain, forcing himself to maintain his careful rhythm. Red blood seeped into his suit, but he pressed onward, finally clearing the crystal field after 20 excruciating minutes. 1 kilometer complete, came the automated announcement, the Cadet Reynolds' vital signs showing elevated stress but within sustainable parameters. The next section of the course featured a series of chemical pools, their surfaces bubbling with noxious compounds. The vapors alone would be toxic, but the real challenge was that they were arranged in a maze pattern, with narrow pathways between them. Under normal gravity, navigating would be simple under 3.2 G. One misstep would mean plunging into corrosive liquid. Felix studied the pattern, looking for the optimal route. His datapad showed the extraction point lay almost directly across the pool field, but the most obvious path was surely a trap. Reynolds appears to be calculating his route, Krill'vax observed. Perhaps he believes this is a mathematical exercise rather than a test of physical capability. Felix smiled grimly. If there was one advantage humans had over many Union species, it was adaptability. He wasn't going to follow the visible paths at all. He approached the edge of the first pool and tested the ground with his foot. As he suspected, the solid pathways were actually only a few centimeters thick artificial platforms designed to appear as natural ground. Beneath them was the same chemical soup as the pools. Felix took a deep breath and moved to what appeared to be a dead-end path. At its termination, he dropped to his knees and, using his multi-tool, pried up the edge of the platform. As he suspected, the platforms were modular sections, lightweight enough to be manipulated if you knew what you were doing. What is the human attempting? He heard an unfamiliar voice ask from the observation deck. I believe he's reconfiguring the course, Trell responded, sounding both impressed and annoyed. Felix leveraged the section up and carefully repositioned it to create a new pathway that cut diagonally across the chemical pools. It wasn't technically against the rules. The objective was simply to reach the extraction point, not to follow a specific route. With the new path in place, Felix moved quickly across, repeating the process twice more until he had traversed the entire field, cutting his expected navigation time by more than half. 2 kilometers complete, came the announcement. Cadet Reynolds' core temperature rising, respiratory function at 82% of optimal. The next section presented a new challenge, a steep incline covered in loose, shifting material resembling volcanic glass. Each step forward sent him sliding back nearly as far, the punishing gravity turning the climb into a brutal test of endurance. Felix dropped to all fours, distributing his weight more evenly. The progress was agonizingly slow, but he maintained forward momentum. Halfway up the incline, the glass-like material began to heat up significantly, reaching temperatures that his suit could barely insulate against. This segment simulates conditions on Pyros Vi, Krill'vax explained, his tone clinical. The surface temperature fluctuates by several hundred degrees within minutes. Quite beautiful, really, though most carbon-based life forms find it less than hospitable. As if on cue, the ground beneath Felix began to glow red-hot. Pain shot through his hands and knees where they pressed against the surface. He scrambled upward with renewed desperation, ignoring the searing pain as pieces of his suit began to melt and adhere to his skin. Cadet Reynolds' pain indicators have exceeded recommended thresholds, a medical officer announced. The commander. Protocols suggest. Continue the test, Krill'vax interrupted. The human has not reached critical failure. With a final lunge, Felix crested the incline, rolling onto his back on the mercifully cooler surface at the top. He allowed himself 10 seconds of rest, no more, before forcing himself to his feet. 3 kilometers complete, the system announced. Warning, Cadet Reynolds' vital signs indicate approaching exhaustion. Hydration levels critical. Felix checked his suit's water supply, finding it nearly depleted. The extreme conditions had caused him to perspire at a rate the suit's systems couldn't compensate for. Dehydration would soon become a serious threat. Ahead lay what appeared to be a dense jungle of metallic vegetation. The plants swayed despite the absence of wind, their surfaces glinting menacingly. His datapad indicated the extraction point lay at the far side, but offered no details about what the metal forest contained. Felix approached cautiously, noting how the nearest plants seemed to orient toward him. He broke off a small piece of debris from the volcanic glass section and tossed it toward the vegetation. Immediately, the nearest plant whipped toward it, metal tendrils lashing out with surprising speed to envelop the fragment and pull it inward. Within seconds, the piece had been reduced to powder. "Ah, the ferrivores," Krill'vax said, "fascinating organisms. They consume silicon and metal compounds, breaking them down at the molecular level. They are quite indiscriminate in their feeding habits." Felix looked down at his environment suit, which contained numerous metal components. He would be walking into the jungle as a moving buffet. But there had to be a way through. This was a test, not an execution. Felix studied the vegetation carefully, noting that the plants responded to movement and, presumably, to the metals in what they perceived as prey. An idea formed. Felix began stripping his suit of non-essential metal components, buckles, reinforcement strips, connector plates. He arranged them in a rough line leading into the jungle but veering away from his intended path. "What is the human doing now?" someone asked from the observation deck. "I believe he's creating a diversion," Trell responded, sounding reluctantly impressed. With his decoys arranged, Felix took a deep breath and threw the first piece deep into the jungle. As anticipated, the movement and metal content triggered a feeding frenzy, with plants whipping toward the object and away from his planned route. He continued throwing pieces at intervals, creating a moving wave of distraction as he carefully picked his way through the forest. By the time he reached the halfway point, he had discarded most of his suit's metal components. The protective value of the garment was severely compromised, but it was a necessary sacrifice. The caustic atmosphere burned his exposed skin, but Vila's regulator continued to provide breathable air around his face. 3/4 of the way through the jungle, disaster struck. The path ahead was blocked by particularly dense growth, with no visible route around. Felix had used his last metal decoy, and the plants were already beginning to notice his presence, tendrils twitching in his direction. In a desperate gambit, Felix removed his datapad, the last significant metal object he possessed, and prepared to throw it as a final distraction. Without it, he would have no map for the remainder of the course, but without a distraction, he wouldn't make it out of the jungle at all. Just as he was about to throw the device, he noticed a pattern in the way the plants moved. They responded most aggressively to rapid motion, but slower movements triggered a much milder response. Perhaps there was another way. Felix returned the datapad to his pocket and began to move with excruciating slowness, each step a careful placement, each shift of weight a deliberate action. The plants stirred slightly but didn't lash out, millimeter by millimeter. He edged through the densest part of the growth, the journey taking nearly 30 minutes to cover what would normally be a few steps. Finally, he emerged from the jungle, his suit in tatters and his skin blistered from exposure, but still moving forward. "Cadet Reynolds has completed 3.8 kilometers, the system announced. Vital signs indicate severe physical stress. Recommendation: terminate test. Continue, Krill'vax ordered, though Felix thought he detected a note of surprise in the commander's voice. The final section of the course consisted of a series of narrow platforms suspended over what appeared to be a gravity well, a localized distortion that would multiply the already crushing gravity to potentially fatal levels. One misstep would mean being pulled down into forces that would crush him instantly. Felix's muscles trembled with exhaustion, his vision beginning to blur. He had less than 15 minutes remaining of his 4-hour time limit. The extraction point was visible now, a glowing portal at the far side of the gravity platforms. "No human has ever attempted this final section," Krill'vax announced. "I wonder if their primitive nervous system is capable of the necessary calculations." Felix ignored the commentary, focusing instead on the patterns of gravitational distortion he could see affecting the dust particles in the air. The platforms weren't static, they shifted position slightly as the gravity fields fluctuated. Timing would be everything. Drawing on his last reserves of strength, Felix began to navigate the platforms. Each jump had to be precisely timed between gravitational pulses, each landing perfectly centered to avoid being pulled over the edge. The 3.2 G baseline made each leap an act of supreme effort. his muscles screaming in protest. Halfway across, disaster struck again. A platform shifted just as he landed, throwing him off balance. Felix teetered on the edge, feeling the immense pull of the gravity well below. In that moment he had a choice: try to recover his balance, or make a desperate jump to the next platform. He jumped. He jumped. For a terrifying moment, he was airborne, the gravity well pulling at him, threatening to alter his trajectory enough to miss the next platform entirely. Then his hands caught the edge, his body slamming against the side with bone-jarring force. The impact nearly caused him to lose his grip, but he held on, dragging himself up with the last of his strength. 3 more platforms. 2. 1. With a final, desperate lunge, Felix hurled himself toward the extraction point. He hit the ground and rolled through the portal, coming to rest on his back, gasping for breath as the punishing gravity suddenly returned to normal. Test complete, the system announced. Time: 3 hours, 57 minutes, 22 seconds. For a long moment, silence reigned. Then the observation deck erupted in a cacophony of voices. Through the haze of pain and exhaustion, Felix saw Admiral Xorix enter the chamber, followed by Commander Krill'vax, whose mandibles were clicking rapidly in what Felix now recognized as agitation. Impossible, Krill'vax was saying. The parameters were specifically calibrated to exceed human physiological capabilities. And yet, Xorix replied, gesturing toward Felix, the evidence contradicts your calibrations, Commander. Medical personnel swarmed around Felix, attaching regenerative patches to his burns and administering fluids to counter his dehydration. Admiral, Krill'vax protested, surely you cannot consider this a legitimate completion of the crucible. The human used unauthorized equipment. He pointed accusingly at the atmospheric regulator still attached to Felix's collar. Actually, Commander, Instructor Trell interjected, if you review the crucible protocols, there is no prohibition against cadets bringing supplementary equipment. The rule states only that they must use the equipment, provided not that they cannot use additional tools. A technicality. Krill'vax sputtered. The foundation of good regulations, Xorix replied calmly. Furthermore, the human demonstrated exactly the qualities the Union claims to value: resourcefulness, adaptation, and determination. He identified the rules as they existed, not as you intended them to be. Felix tried to sit up, wincing at the pain that shot through his battered body. Sir, if I may. Rest, Cadet Reynolds, Xorix said. You have earned that much, at least. As the medical team prepared to transport him to the infirmary, Felix caught sight of Vela watching from the entry doorway. She gave him a subtle nod, part acknowledgement, part respect. Admiral, Krill'vax said, lowering his voice, this changes nothing about the broader question. One exceptional specimen does not mean humans as a species are ready for full Union integration. Perhaps not, Xorix agreed. But it does mean we must reconsider our methods of evaluation. He turned to Felix. Cadet Reynolds, your performance today will be recorded in the Academy archives. Tomorrow, once you have recovered, we will discuss your future with the Union fleet. As they carried him out, Felix caught one last glimpse of Commander Krill'vax, standing rigidly by the crucible entrance, his compound eyes fixed on Felix with an unreadable expression. Whatever came next, Felix had proven something today, not just about himself, but about humanity's place among the stars. The test had been designed to be impossible, yet he had succeeded. Not through superior strength or speed or even intelligence, but through the uniquely human quality of refusing to accept the limitations others placed upon him. The final challenge was complete. But Felix suspected his true trials were just beginning.